Okay, ready for a story that'll make you rethink what you thought you knew about folklore.
I'm ready. What's the story?
It's about Ombana. And get this guy went from living a normal life to being like a full-blown deity.
A deity, like a god.
Yep, complete with a temple, and the whole thing revolves around a motorcycle.
A motorcycle. Okay, now I have to hear more about this. That sounds wild. What's so special about this Ambana? And how does a motorcycle figure into all of this?
Right. And what's crazy is how fast it all happened. It wasn't over centuries, it was just a few decades.
Wow, a few decades. That's like no time at all in the grand scheme of things, especially for someone to reach god status.
I know, right? So who was this guy before he became this revered figure?
Well, he was born as Singh Rathore, just a regular young man from a village in Rajasthan, India.
Rajasthan. Got it. Was he like a prince or something? He was the son of the village headman, right?
Yeah, the headman. Not royalty, but he had some social standing for sure.
Okay, so not exactly your average Joe. Was he known for anything special before all this deity stuff happened?
Actually, from what we found, he seemed to have a pretty normal life, for a young man in his village back in the late 80s. He was known for being generous, always willing to help out.
Sounds like a good guy. Anything else?
He loved his Royal Enfield motorcycle.
Ah, motorcycle. I'm starting to see where this might be going.
It was a pretty big deal back then, a real status symbol, and this might be important later. He liked to have a drink or two.
Okay, so we have a generous guy, son of the headman, loves his motorcycle, and maybe enjoys a drink. What happened that launched him into, well, godhood?
It all started with a tragic accident, December 2nd, 1989. Ombana was riding his motorcycle.
Of course he was.
Back to his village. He was coming back from Pali.
Okay, so he's riding his motorcycle.
On the way, he crashed into a tree.
Oh, no.
And the accident was fatal.
That's incredibly sad. But how does a fatal accident lead to being worshipped as a god? I mean, there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Oh, there is. And this is where it gets really interesting. Official records from the Rohe police station, they say that his death, it was due to reckless driving.
Reckless driving. You mean they blamed him for the accident?
They did. They actually charged him posthumously with endangering lives.
Wait, they charged him after he died? That's crazy.
Yeah, pretty wild. It seems the authorities saw it as a clear case of, irresponsible behavior.
But you said it gets interesting. Did people believe the official story?
Well, like a lot of stories passed down through generations, multiple versions started popping up. Each one gave a different take on what happened that night.
Ah, I see. So it becomes more of a he said, she said situation.
Right, you could say that. It's like the Rashomon effect you see in movies,
Yeah.
The same event told from different angles, maybe revealing different truths.
I like that, the Rashomon effect. So what were some of these alternative stories?
Some villagers, they said that the accident wasn't his fault at all, that he was blinded by the fog lights of an oncoming truck.
Oh, that would be terrible.
Others insisted that he swerved to avoid hitting a cow, basically sacrificing himself to protect it.
Cows are sacred in India, right?
They are. And then there were the whispers that maybe alcohol was involved.
Oh, wow. Even though the official records say reckless driving? So we've got a tragic accident, shrouded in mystery and multiple interpretations. But how did this turn into full-blown deity status? With a temple and everything.
Well, right after the accident, things started getting a little strange. His motorcycle was taken to the police station, but...
Hold on, let me guess. It disappeared.
It did, but then it reappeared back at the crash site.
It came back, like on its own.
That's what people say, and that's just the start of it. Soon after, Ambana's grandmother, she had this vivid dream.
I bet he was in it.
He was, and he told her to build a shrine at the crash site.
A shrine. So even in death, he was connected to that place and his motorcycle. Did the dream say why he wanted a shrine?
According to the stories, he promised that if they built it, he would stay there in spirit, to protect travelers from harm on that stretch of road.
Wow. So it wasn't just about remembering him. It was about making the site into a place of protection, a place for maybe divine intervention.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. People began reporting miracles, feeling protected when they passed by the crash site.
Miracles? Like what kind of miracles?
Drivers especially, they felt a new sense of safety on that highway, which is known to be pretty dangerous.
So we have a disappearing motorcycle, a grandmother's dream, and reports of miracles, all connected to this accident site. Sounds like the perfect setup for a powerful myth.
It does, doesn't it? All that, plus the mystery around the accident itself, it created fertile ground for belief to take root.
And grow it did. From what I've read, his following just exploded, especially among drivers who were looking for his protection on those treacherous roads. What I find fascinating is that his motorcycle, his vahana, that's like his divine vehicle, became a central part of worship, right alongside his image.
It is pretty amazing. It's like the motorcycle itself absorbed some of his spirit, became sacred. People started praying to it, leaving offerings not just to his image, but to the motorcycle itself.
So the motorcycle becomes an extension of him, a physical representation of his power to protect, especially those traveling those roads.
Exactly. Think about it. In this region, traditional folk deities are often depicted with horses, right? Another symbol of divinity, travel. The motorcycle, in a way, it serves that same purpose for Ombana.
That's a really good point. It's a perfect example of how modern things can blend into traditional belief systems. So we've gone from young man to protector deity, his motorcycle a sacred relic. What are the rituals surrounding his worship? What do people actually do when they visit his shrine?
Well, this is where it gets even more interesting and maybe a little bit paradoxical. One of the most common offerings you'll see at Ombana's shrine is alcohol.
Wait, alcohol? But we just talked about how he died in an accident, reckless driving. Isn't that, I don't know, a big contradictory?
It is, and yet it's also very telling about how complex and sometimes contradictory folklore can be. Some believe the offering comes from the idea that Ombana himself enjoyed a drink or two while he was alive. So they offer it as a way to honor him, to, appease his spirit.
So it's not about condoning reckless behavior. It's more about connecting with him on a personal level.
I think so. It's almost like saying, hey, we know you enjoyed a good time and we're not judging you for it.
It's such a fascinating example of how practices can seem to clash with the official narrative, but still hold so much meaning for the people practicing them.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that folklore isn't always, neat and tidy. It's often messy, full of contradictions, and always changing as people reinterpret and adapt beliefs to fit their world.
So we've got this mix of traditional beliefs, this modern twist with the motorcycle, and a ritual that might seem a bit at odds with how he died. It all adds up to a really compelling story. But how did it all happen so fast? He went from a village resident to a worship deity in just a few decades. That seems incredibly fast compared to other deities whose stories have been around for centuries.
It is remarkably fast. A couple of possible explanations for that. The location of his shrine is definitely one factor. It's right on a busy highway, so it's super convenient for travelers to stop and pay their respects.
It's like a drive-through for divine intervention.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And second, the motorcycle itself is a powerful image. It's a modern icon that resonates with people, maybe more so than some traditional imagery might.
Especially in a culture where motorcycles are a common mode of transportation. And a symbol of freedom, even adventure. It's like the perfect combination of elements to create this really modern folk deity.
Precisely. And this rapid deification, it might also reflect something about our modern world. Information travels fast, stories spread like wildfire online, and maybe, just maybe, our need for meaning and security, especially when faced with uncertainty, is even more intense now.
That's a really interesting point. Makes you wonder, what's happening today that might become the myths of tomorrow?
It really does. But before we jump ahead too far, let's circle back to Ombana. There's another detail, a really intriguing one, that adds another layer to this myth. His motorcycle's number plate, 7773, has become a sought-after symbol of good luck and protection.
Wait, are you serious? People want that specific number for their own vehicles.
They do. It's like the number itself is a lucky charm, a way to connect with Ombana's protective power, get his blessing for their own travels.
Wow, that's incredible. A direct line to the divine, all through a motorcycle number plate. It's like a modern-day amulet almost.
Exactly. It really highlights just how powerful belief can be, that human desire to find meaning and protection, especially when facing the unknown, like the dangers of the road.
So we've got this tragic accident, conflicting stories, the mysterious motorcycle, the grandmother's dream, miracles, alcohol offerings, and now a lucky number plate. It's an amazing mix of elements that have come together to make a truly unique myth.
It is, isn't it? And the story doesn't stop there. Remember those fad we were talking about earlier, those traditional Rajasthani painted scrolls that tell stories of folk deities?
Yeah, those are like mobile temples, right?
Exactly. Carried from village to village, the storytellers sing and narrate the scenes. Well, get this. The researcher who wrote our main source material, he actually commissioned the creation of the first ever fad depicting Ombana's story.
No way. So Ombana is being incorporated into this ancient storytelling tradition. That's amazing.
It is. It's a sign that his story is not just a passing fad, but something that's potentially becoming part of a more established religious tradition. The fad, with its vibrant images and storytelling, it could really cement his place in the pantheon of Rajasthani folk deities.
That's wild. It's like we're seeing folklore evolve in real time, a modern-day myth finding its way into an ancient art form. It makes you wonder what's going to happen to Ombana's story as time goes on.
It really does. Will his popularity keep growing? Will he be recognized as an official deity within Hinduism? Or will his story fade away? Only time will tell.
That's what I love about deep dives like this. They spark more questions than answers, make us curious, challenge us to think about the deeper meaning behind these stories.
Absolutely. Ombana's story really highlights the fact that folklore is a living, breathing thing. It's constantly changing, adapting, reflecting the times and the needs of the people who believe.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the origins of this folklore, the different sides of the accident, the motorcycle becoming sacred, and how Ombana became this deity. Before we move on, though, what are your thoughts? What about this deep dive is sticking with you? What do you find most intriguing or maybe even unsettling about Ombana's story? Does it make you rethink your own relationship with belief or rituals or even just the objects that are important to you? Let us know, because we're all on this journey of discovery together.
It's interesting, as we've been talking about Ombana and this whole motorcycle worship thing.
What is it?
It's not totally unheard of, you know what I mean?
Really? What makes you say that?
Well, if you think about it, objects have been considered sacred across cultures for, forever.
I guess that's true.
They become these vessels for belief, for reverence, we humans, we have this need to give regular objects spiritual meaning, connect the physical to the spiritual.
Yeah, okay. I see what you mean, like relics in religions.
Exactly. Pieces of the true cross in Christianity, sacred texts in different faiths, things connected to saints or prophets. They're not just objects anymore. They take on this aura, a sacred energy.
Right. So you're saying that Ombana's motorcycle is kind of like that, but, a modern version.
Yeah, totally. It's a 20th century twist on something that's been going on for ages. The motorcycle, it's like the relic, the physical link to the divine. And it's not just any motorcycle, it's a Royal Enfield.
Which already had a certain image, right?
Exactly. It had that mystique, that power adventure vibe. And then being linked to Ombana with the stories about his death, the miracles, it just took it to a whole other level.
So the existing symbolism of the motorcycle, combined with the stories, made it even more powerful.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The motorcycle was always meant to be sacred, just waiting for the right story to come along.
It makes you think, would a different object have had the same effect?
Good question. I think the motorcycle, with its connection to freedom, risk, the open road, it really played a key role in shaping Ombana's myth.
It embodies those qualities that people associate with a powerful deity. Strength, speed, conquering obstacles.
Exactly. Especially for people who depend on vehicles or face danger on the road every day, that symbolism is really potent.
And this object veneration thing ties back to what we were discussing earlier. That need for security, for control when things feel uncertain.
Absolutely. By venerating an object associated with a deity, people are trying to tap into that power, create a sense of safety, a sense of order in a world that can feel chaotic.
I'm really starting to see how all these pieces connect. The tragic death, the mystery, the motorcycle, the need for protection. It's like this rich tapestry of belief and ritual.
Yeah, and it's a tapestry that's still being woven, right? New stories emerge, interpretations change, practices adapt. It's like a living, breathing testament to the power of folklore and how much we humans crave belief.
This whole story is just captivating. But before we go too far down this road, what are our listeners thinking? What are you guys finding most interesting or maybe even a bit unsettling about Ombana's story?
Yeah, what's resonating with you? What's sparking your curiosity?
Does this make you rethink your own relationship with belief or rituals or even the objects that are important to you? Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. We're all in this together.
We've talked about the motorcycle as the main thing people focus on, but there's another element I find really fascinating.
Oh, what's that?
The whole alcohol thing.
Oh, yeah, the offerings? That is intriguing and kind of confusing. I mean, alcohol is associated with recklessness, right?
It is. Loss of control, even doing bad things. And when you think about how the police said Ombana died, reckless driving, the alcohol offerings become, a paradox.
Definitely. It makes you wonder, about the connection between what people believe and what they actually do. and how stories change, how people deal with things that seem contradictory in their beliefs. So how do we make sense of this? Is it just a culture clash, or is there something deeper going on?
It's important to remember folklore isn't always black and white, right? It's messy, it's full of contradictions, and it's open to different interpretations. That's what makes it so interesting.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So how does that apply to these alcohol offerings?
Some think it's because Ombana himself, they say he liked to drink when he was alive. So they offer alcohol as a way to honor him, maybe appease his spirit, even ask for forgiveness for their own mistakes, especially on a road.
So it's not necessarily saying reckless behavior is good. It's more about relating to him on a personal level.
That's how I see it, like saying, hey, we get it, you like to have fun, no judgment.
We're not perfect either.
Exactly. It's a way to connect with him, to acknowledge his flaws, and ask for his favor anyway.
It's another example of how people can relate to deities in a way that feels human, even if it means accepting some contradictions.
Absolutely. And this whole idea of alcohol as an offering, it makes you think about what makes something sacred in the first place.
Yeah, that is a big question. Why is one thing sacred and another thing isn't?
What turns a normal object or a normal action into something that has religious meaning?
And I bet the answer is different depending on where you are, what you believe, and the stories behind it all.
You got it. But one thing's for sure, rituals, they're super important in shaping how we understand the world, our connection to the divine. They give meaning to our experiences, help us connect to something bigger than ourselves and find comfort in the unknown.
And in Ombana's case, the alcohol offerings, even though they seem contradictory, they do all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's amazing how powerful belief is, how folklore can shape our worldview, even when it doesn't make perfect sense.
Totally. That's what's so cool about these deep dives. We start with what seems like a simple story, and then, bam, it opens up a whole world of meaning.
You said it. It's like a journey into the heart of belief, the power of storytelling. Now, you mentioned there was one more thing you wanted to discuss.
Oh, yeah, you're right. We were talking about how Ombana's story is still evolving, and the researcher, he went and had that fad made.
Yeah, that first ever fad depicting Ombana's story. That's a pretty big deal, don't you think? I mean, the fad, with its history, its visual storytelling, it could solidify Ombana's place among those traditional Rajasthani deities.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what's next for this story?
Right. The fact that someone commissioned a fad shows that belief in Ombana, it's spreading.
Going beyond just the local people.
It could introduce his story to a much wider audience, maybe even contribute to him being recognized as an official deity in Hinduism. But there's also the question of how the story itself might change over time.
That's a good point. Will the motorcycle always be the focus? Or will it shift? I mean, think about how many versions of traditional myths there are.
That's true. It wouldn't be surprising to see new interpretations, new details added as the story gets passed down. Maybe the motorcycle will fade into the background, or maybe it'll become even more important. Who knows?
And it's not just the story. The rituals might change too.
For sure. We've already seen different kinds of offerings people bring to his shrine. As he gets more popular, new rituals could develop, where the existing ones might take on new meaning.
It really shows how dynamic folklore is. It's not fixed. It's constantly being reshaped by the people who believe it. Ombana's story is like a perfect example of that.
It is, and that's part of what makes folklore so interesting. It's a living expression of belief, always changing and adapting to the world around it. Thinking about Ombana, this whole thing, his rapid rise to godhood, it makes you wonder, what it means for belief in our modern world.
Yeah, it's been on my mind too. He became a deity in just a few decades. So many other deities, they have centuries, millennia of stories and traditions behind them.
Right. It really makes you think about how belief works today.
Like, has the internet age changed things? Has it sped up how myths are made?
It probably has. Think about it. Stories used to take generations to spread. Now something can go viral in hours.
Exactly. So that must have a huge impact on how beliefs take hold, right?
For sure. In Ombana's case, easy access to a shrine and the highway location, and the way his story spread through word of mouth and online, it all contributed to how fast he became popular.
It's like his story just resonated with people. That need for protection, for meaning, especially in a world that can feel pretty chaotic. And the motorcycle, the freedom, the risk, it became a symbol of that.
You got it. And in India, motorcycles are more than just vehicles. They're vital. They represent progress, connection. So that symbolism becomes even stronger.
It's like the motorcycle, in Ombana's story, becomes this bridge between the real world and the spiritual world. A way to find security, even divine favor, in everyday life.
And what's really interesting is that his myth is still evolving. New interpretations, new practices are being added all the time.
It's like we're watching a brand new mythology being born right in front of us. The stories unfolding, the rituals are developing, and the lines between belief, folklore, lived experience, they're all blurred.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that folklore isn't static. It's an ongoing process, this conversation between the past, present, and future.
And in Ombana's story, that conversation is like charged with the energy of modern India, its anxieties, its dreams.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important takeaways here. Folklore, it's alive. It's not just in books or museums. It's all around us, shaping what we believe, how we act, reflecting our deepest hopes and fears.
It shows us that folklore can adapt, change with society. Embrace new technology, address new fears, offer comfort in a world that can be pretty overwhelming.
For sure. So as we wrap things up, I want our listeners to think about the role of folklore in their own lives. What stories have shaped your beliefs? What rituals do you follow?
What objects are special to you? What meaning do they hold?
And what new stories are popping up around you? What new beliefs, rituals, sacred objects are being created?
It's fascinating to think about, because when we understand the power of folklore, both old and new, we understand the world better and ourselves better.
Beautifully said. Remember, the journey of discovery never ends. Stay curious, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to question the stories that shape our lives. Until next time, keep diving deep.